You are watching Hearthstone Grandmasters here for the Asia Pacific region, the first region of the day. So if you are joining us right now, couldn't be at a better time. Full day of Hearthstone yet to come, even if it was a very quick day of Hearthstone here in APAC, at least yesterday. There was a lot of interesting decisions, interesting deck choices being brought along the way. And one of those, Gia, is the priest that we see from Alan. It's not so much interesting that he has the priest. What is kind of interesting is that he's one of the only people to bring it at all this week in APAC, and the only one to get into top 8 with it as well.
That's in stark contrast to what we're seeing in EU, where their entire top 4 after the Swiss portion was Priest. So I don't know if it's APAC not really liking Priest or not believing in Priest, or in the case of Bank Yugi possibly feeling like they can target Priest a bit more heavily. And you can make the same argument for Tom on the Zoo, perhaps, although he did not manage to make it to the semifinals. For players like Alan and Tyler, however, it makes a lot that they would still default to this deck. I feel that it's also correlated to these are two players that maybe have practice groups more in the realm of EU and Americans.
And I think that really perfectly tells the story of Alan as a player, because he just has one foot on either side of the globe, it feels like, at all times. He's very close friends with a lot of the American and European practice partners. I believe it was Muzzy who inspired this version of the deck list for him, who he practices with a fair bit. But he also is very well known in the Chinese Hearthstone community. He, I believe, is a very common caster, that he casts a lot of the Chinese events. But obviously being able to speak English as well, it's kind of something we don't see a whole lot of in the Asia Pacific scene, where it's a huge amount of involvement in kind of two of the big communities in Hearthstone. And I think that's one of the unique advantages that he brings to the table, is that you can bring a little bit of the weirdness and the spice from all the different practice groups, and on average, I think play very, very good Hearthstone because of it.
Yeah, it's not to be underestimated, the value of having connections within the scene, especially when regions tend to be a little bit insular. Sometimes somebody's coming up with the latest tech, and if you don't speak the language, you won't know until a week or two later. For Alan, he can have access to whatever newest cards are being played in archetypes wherever in the globe. But Blitzchung, this is a guy who has been engrossed with aggro decks for a very, very long time. I think he'll be an expert player on this mage. You mentioned yesterday we saw some excellent piloting from Killen all day. I expect that same caliber of play from Blitzchung, if not higher.
As do I. And getting things rolling right away, he's got the kind of hand that I like the look of against Priest, because Arcane Intellect, even though I personally lean towards keeping it more than the players, I fully appreciate that it's a bit too slow a lot of the time. You want to get something on the board so that you're not instantly falling behind to Disciple of Galakron, Sethic Veilweaver, whatever the Priest throws down in the early game. Whereas Solarian and Cram Session could not be more perfectly suited to get the minions on board and get the hardcore rolling for those big combos.
Indeed, and Blitzchung also picked up that Primordial Studies to possibly put together a 3-card draw effect from the Cram Session. I'm definitely looking at Thalnos for that purpose, just being the cheapest one.
I was kind of looking at Azure Explorer there, that the combos that you can make work with Cram Session or maybe Coin Raz on turn 4 were a little interesting, but I was probably getting a little bit too fancy there, and Thalnos is just always going to be decent.
It does mean, though, that Blitzchung is not getting on board this turn. There was a quick point variance into Cram Session, but I think Blitzchung was trying to see if he could reasonably get 3 draws. Not going to quite work out with the mana this turn, but unfortunately for him, there's a Sethic facing down right now, and it's definitely not a card that you want to leave up because of the threat of Apotheosis, etc. So it looks like he's digging for an answer.
I mean, already there's so much to talk about, because this is really the problem with the deck that I find with a lot of new players. It was definitely my biggest struggle with the deck when I first set out to play Temper Mage, was I just played out too many of spells. I was like, oh, I have a spare mana here. I'll throw down a Ray of Frost. I'll throw down a Magic Trick. I'll throw down a Primordial Studies. But what you quickly realize is there's a very limited number of 1-mana spells in the deck. There's quite a few of them. You know, you're rocking about 6 to 8 usually, somewhere in that region. But they disappear quickly if you're just churning through them. And I think there's a lot of argument as to Blitzchung should have just held on to the Primordial Studies there, and we could have seen Coin into the Solarian into Cram Session. I think that's the way I would have played it.
I would have to agree for that line. There's also, I suppose, the fact that even the magic trick, sometimes you can think about holding that if you want an extra activation on a Mana Cyclone turn. But he did commit to playing it alongside Solarian. So for the turn, after he already committed to not coining out Solarian, I think it's fine there. As for Alan, definitely looking at the cheapest dragon, but when you have Murazond offered, it is really, really hard to turn down.
Right. It was the choice of like immediate power play with going for Big Ol' Whelp next turn, which is pretty undeniably a better play than Wretched Shooter, or the potentially game-winning play in a few turns' time with Murazond. So I really don't begrudge him for that line at all.
Blitzchung now with the pickup of Wand Thief, we could just see Thalnos Wand Thief played out. It's getting to the point where when you're trying to optimize the cram session, sometimes you end up getting too greedy with it and it ends up back on one draw. But I think it's pretty reasonable to assume that Thalnos will stick this turn, given that Alan did not have a minion on board.
And to Blitzchung's credit, again, now, because he saved the coin right at the start of the game, you know, it was a slower push-off to the game. He could have maybe got a little bit of chip damage in, but against Priest, that's not the biggest deal. Whereas now he has the opportunity to go coin 5-drop into 5-drop, which is around the time that Priest is actually quite weak at the moment. You know, they don't have Mass Hysteria anymore in order to clear the board, and it's before Soul Mirror and Plague of Death. So I'm starting to see the reasoning here for Blitzchung come together with his Tempo Mage play.
Yeah, it's a very good point, because even though I've been going on and on about Cram Session, you don't necessarily need to draw if you have on-curve plays, which is what Blitzchung has with the coin. For Alan, though, he can also pick up a Jandis for himself right next turn, or the option of a coin if he wants to get the Murazond down a turn earlier. Definitely looking at Jandis. And also possibly playing out the Broom this turn just to clear.
Yeah, I like the look of Broom this turn most likely. I mean, I'm really tempted by the coin there, I've got to say. That was definitely what I was looking at. But I guess the thinking is, if you have information that your opponent has Jandis in hand, all of a sudden a 1-damage Raz actually becomes pretty powerful.
That's true. But then holding back the Broom here means that, well, Alan knew this is a possibility, of course, that the Raz just comes down and sweeps up the Lazul for free. And now the response is Raz into this turn, which is not hitting the Jandis.
It's not, this is something that Alan had to consider, of course.
Well, what it does, however, is shut off the Jandis follow-up to this Raz, because Blitzchung, if he just plays Jandis, in all likelihood will not be able to clear Alan's Raz.
Trade, yeah.
I think it's time for Blitzchung to deviate. We could see the Devolving Missiles come out, and he's also drawn Lab Partner, so he can turn this into the Cram Session turn.
Yeah, I'm happy with that. It is, again, chewing through those cheap spells, but I guess with Wand Thief and drawing a whole bunch of cards, it works out okay here for Blitzchung in the end.
Ooh, another Cram Session.
It says explode!
He's playing the generated one, which is a small non-optimization, I think, in terms of withholding information.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. But a small optimization is drawing Solarian Prime. You're very happy with that one indeed. And also at this point in the game, it's not often that you see a Mana Giant available for 4 mana, which is going to be a pretty big boon to Blitzchung's game plan, especially with the pickup of Sorcerer's Apprentice now. The options just kind of started flying wide open. There are a lot of power plays that are going to be coming up.
Yeah, I was thinking about popping off this turn with the Apprentice, just because the Cram Session gets him 2 draws, but I guess the fact that Blitzchung is running the slightly minion-heavier version with both Jandis and Shanvala, there's a couple whiffs he could have gotten, and the Jandis, after he's seen the Raz on the other side, is pretty likely to stick some of the generated minions. The Wasteland Assassin is one of the best ones to get off Jandis. Yeah,
it's really, really big. It's mitigated, of course, somewhat by Alan being able to get his own copy of the Stealth Reborn off of the Soul Mirror. But still a big deal. blitzchung to be able to try and get some damage through, because this is always what I talk about as the plan of the matchup for Mage, is how you want to stick a bit of board, always keep putting just enough pressure, and then close the game out with minions. And so until they find Apotheosis, which is only a one-of in the deck, every point of damage is a big deal against the Priest.
And I would argue that that Soul Mirror was pretty okay for blitzchung because he has the Solarian Prime. He kind of set up a board that says if you have Soul Mirror, it's not a huge blowout because I have Prime, which is likely to answer them. And if it doesn't get answered, then he's able to continue pushing damage. It looks like blitzchung's thinking about a different play this turn, though. This looks like a pretty clear Prime from my perspective.
Yeah, I was definitely looking at that as well. I mean, obviously Prime can go wrong is always the thing to consider, but the thing that sways me back every time is it's just a 7/7 on the board. It's a big old body, even if it doesn't clear everything up.
I feel that, at least from my experience, the optimal time to play Prime is around this type of board state where you're behind, but it's not by so much that it's insurmountable for Prime to deal with. It's like one cone of cold can deal with this if it's targeted correctly. A blizzard or a flame strike cleans it up very nice. And you also don't necessarily want to play Prime when you're too far ahead on board if your opponent has nothing in play, because then the spells will start targeting your own minions.
But Gia, this turn all of a sudden goes crazy. Blitzchung trying to get the Giants down before Plague of Death comes down. But Alan, in response, with Murazond to get both the Giants plus the broomstick that he saved, is able to wipe the board and put himself in a dominant position.
Yep, this seems like no better time to get the broom down, and there you can make arguments for even crazier Murazond turns with the Mana Cyclone Apprentice pop-off, but if you're given 2 8/8s for free, I think you absolutely take that.
Yeah, it's just room on the board that's messing him up here, because it will also summon Mirror Image. So he wants to make sure he clears up as much room as possible. Agree with this line completely. Oh, but he doesn't have any room to play it at all anyway. He couldn't have played it first.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, and he couldn't have cleared any other minions because of the mirror images in the way for blitzchung.
Well, so he could have prayed that he got the right order and gone with trade the minion after. But then if mirror image was the first card to come down, he wouldn't have got the Giants at all. It was actually a deceptively complicated turn there.
It's true. Worth looking back on. But for now, blitzchung has drawn Evocation, can start popping off a generated Flame Strike and Ray of Frost.
Big deal.
Is huge here.
Big, big deal. Damage to face is what we're looking at here for blitzchung. He's already just 2 damage off lethal. Solarian Prime, the Mana Cyclone, all of this going to be trying to generate as much as humanly possible.
And while he didn't get the Mana Cyclone down, it's really that 2 HP left here that's the big kicker. blitzchung just praying that there's no Apotheosis to land on this Murazond. However, Galakrond is the pickup for Alan, so at the very least he can gain some armor and get a full board clear.
Yep. He can, keep Murazond alive at 1, I guess, after Shadow at Death plus Galakrond, which you take. You know, you have a chance to stick a board, and maybe if the Mage's hand is looking a little bit dead, you can lock things down thereafter.
Yeah, I mean, you would still threaten these 2 Giants on the next turn.
Looks like the only line to me, unless you want to go like Infiltrator and rush it in, but I think that's just kind of a less efficient way of attacking.
Alright, but this is the board state that blitzchung was saving the Prime for. I wonder if you ever play Solarian first to get additional spell damage for what it casts, but perhaps he's looking to make this a cram session turn instead.
Big deal already. Board frozen. If nothing else...
Oh! It's gonna have a heart attack there, Jar.
Okay.
50-50.
Alan's in with a chance now. That was 50% of the time just over in that instance.
But even so, even if it wasn't immediate lethal, it was a huge swing for blitzchung, a successful Prime nonetheless.
So Murazond plus Broomstick is a play available again this turn, which will draw him 1 or 2 cards, depending on the order.
Mm-hmm. All of these are so expensive, but probably Evasive Worm as one that can rush immediately. Actually, maybe it's Twin Tyrant, because if you take Evasive Worm, the most he can pair with it is Broomstick anyway, and the Broom is getting played this turn, right?
Yeah, I think I like Twin Tyrant because you've seen both the Giants now, right? So pretty much every mage minion that's played from here on out dies to 4 damage.
You think this is your time? It is mine.
I'm gonna take the Worm instead to give him guaranteed targetable action, I suppose. Okay, the good order.
Time is running out.
Indeed,
That tells me this Raised Dead is not getting played.
Yeah, that's looking a little bit scary. It's got to be said.
Oh, tough turn now for blitzchung. Like, the Firebrand, low-key, does a lot of cleaning up here, but blitzchung has to have it on his mind that can he just find the extra damage and close out the game soon? Alan does not have the healing hero power anymore.
Okay, let's draw. Let's see what the deck can offer. You know, there's still Evocation that could find burst damage.
Whoa! Nutty Firebrand there. Okay, this probably looks like a Mana Cyclone turn now, right? You can just go... Oh, Frostbolt!
Yep. Only needs a little bit of extra help now from Mana Cyclone.
And that's not Burst, but he has Prime in hand.
And he has...
I mean, Solarian.
Oh yeah, he's got Solarian, he's got Potion, so that could be another Mana Cyclone, which could generate him more burn spells, potentially, if this one doesn't get the job done. If it survives the turn, that is.
And it very well could. Because Alan's Cabal Acolyte, the only card he can proc it with, is dealing Alan more damage. He might just play this out as a 2/6 taunt and go, Worm. Oh man, does Blitzchung have the mana to do this 100%?
Spell damage, spell damage. That's 5, that's just lethal!
Oh yeah, with a Polymorph, of course!
It was leaving the Mana Cyclone alive on board that was the downfall there. I mean, the only way that he could really effectively, completely clear that board would be to decimate his own in the process with the Plague of Death at the same time. It was a tough situation for Alan to be in at the end there, for sure, in terms of clearing absolutely everything off the board. But it was a very interesting game on both halves in terms of the push and pull of fighting for board, with the real crux of it being, for me, when Blitzchung went for that very, very different line to what we were expecting. You and I were saying, just slam down the Solarian Prime, get it into play so that you can clear the board and maybe generate some extra threats in the meanwhile. But he said, no, I'm finding that window before Plague of Death comes down, putting 16 damage onto the board. And because of the mirror image, it was only the fact that he played so much onto the board that stopped him from just being blown out by the broomstick at that point in the game anyway.
It's a very niche interaction, and I think Alan, the hesitation he had for that turn was trying to figure out the odds of how often does this work. Is it better odds for me to trade the Wasteland Assassin first? And I think he did come up with the best statistical play to be able to deal with Blitzchung's Giants. The outcome didn't work there, but that was just such a cool spot. And I think very cool lines from Alan and Blitzchung on both sides.
Very, very cool lines. Yeah, I mean, again, this is what I love about Tempo Mage so much, is I think a lot of players would disagree with some of the lines that Alan took there, that Blitzchung took. But I'm sure many more players would yet agree with him once again. It's a deck that's so difficult to nail down to a science. It's much more of an art, I find, in how it's often played out. But now that given this is specialist format, both of our players have the opportunity to switch over to either their secondary or tertiary decks. But interestingly enough, Blitzchung is one of the few players who seems to not have an anti-priest list teched in, with instead having one list with double Swampoos, presumably for weapon rogues and warriors, and one with Living Dragon Breath and Boom Pistol Bully, presumably for turtle mages, is what I'd have to guess, to the best of my ability with that one.
That's my guess as well. You could make an argument that the Living Dragon Breath is for the mirror, but Boom Pistol Bully doesn't strike me as something you really want to play in the mirror. It seems very slow. It could just be that what does an anti-priest tech even look like for Tempo Mage? There is not that many, or not that much room for difference. Or it's also possible that blitzchung's primary deck is what he feels is best against Priest. This is running Jandis and Shanvala in the core deck, which is not something you would see in all Tempo Mage builds. But if I'm going up against Priest, I think those are two cards that you would want in the list.
Yeah, I mean, I think if I had to guess, it would be something like taking out the Firebrands, which are feeling to me like one of the most cuttable cards in the deck at the moment, at least one of them. And then you could slot in another Conjurer's Calling. Maybe Archmage Antonidas is always something that you can play around with the possibility of. Or maybe you could even revert back to the old kind of infinite damage game plan with Mozaki that you went for a lot of the time, and try and go for a true OTK that way. I think there is room to tech around with Tempo Mage in Specialist, which is, again, to some degree why I'm sad that we only get 1 week of metagame. We don't get to see players iterate on their designs week after week. They just get one shot at it. And so far, I think blitzchung has done a pretty good job of it. I don't think you generally want to mess too heavily with the deck, which is why I like him just swapping out a couple of cards without going too crazy.
On the other hand, though, we have Alan on the other end of the spectrum. For the secondary and the tertiary deck, he swapped out 5 cards and put in 5 whole different ones. So Alan is teching hard for specific matchups, with the secondary being there for Rogue and Weapon Rogue and Bomb Warrior, and the tertiary for the Priest Mirror. However, he's not running into either of those matchups, so I do believe he'll be sticking to the primary, as is blitzchung.
Yeah, I don't think you're looking at switching over to like the anti-warrior build, because I mean, there's some argument because you run a couple of extra 2-drops in the form of Ooze and Pyromancer, which are just like things that you can play at the start of the game, and you're losing the late game stuff. But I think the late game stuff can actually be pretty good against Tempo Mage, because while we do describe it generally as an aggro deck, as kind of, I think, the closest general archetype that you could name it as, it's not really a traditional aggro deck. It has a lot of staying power if played correctly.
Indeed. Speaking of staying power, we had the discussion that keeping draw for blitzchung was reasonable last game, and he threw away Arcane Intellect because he already had Cram Session. But this time he actually keeps it without guaranteed curve, but now the curve has come, and I think that this could be one of those more save up your cards for a big mana cyclone turn game plan for Tempo Mage, instead of the more minion-based approach we saw from blitzchung. Although the Jandis draw with Rouse already kind of makes me take that back a bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's looking like a very, very strong start for blitzchung indeed. If he can find himself Mana Cyclone, Mana Giant, he basically just needs some kind of payoff at the moment for all the mana cheating that Apprentice will allow him to do. But he has a lot of stuff to do in the meantime. You know, Firebrand on the next turn, Jandis, Raz. He can curve out very effectively for the next few turns.
You don't pick the ones. See?
Alan also picks up his good early minions. Radiance is not the best, but it's at a weird point where the Vile Fiend is still dormant, so you don't necessarily want to play Firebrand this turn.
So obviously he has the information that the Vile Fiend is going to become undormantized next turn. And so saving Firebrand for then does sound decent. You know, you could even go with Devolving Missiles for an almost guaranteed board clear on the same turn. But if he doesn't play the Firebrand on this turn, it's looking like just a complete skip, basically, on developing any proactive mana.
Yeah, it's true. Okay, he can use this turn to play a Secret. Both of these, both the Mirror Entity and Netherwind Portal, have arguments for them.
Yeah.
My problem with just Firebrand that turn is that you know it's dead to Vile Fiend plus the 2/2 at the very least trading in.
Yeah.
So if not going for a Magic Trick line, I was thinking it would even be Firebrand plus Magic Trick to kill the 2/2.
Yeah, that's definitely what I was looking at as the alternate line. In the end, blitzchung forgoes the Secret entirely to develop an extra lab partner and clear off the board, which again is fine. All of these cheap spells, as I said, are not infinite, and it's good getting as many of them as possible because he's drawn a few cards already. He can only be so far off from Mana Giant or Mana Cyclone. Or I guess it's also worth mentioning Shanvala would be pretty fantastic here as well to get a huge push on the board.
picking up second devolving missiles kind of gives insight into blitzchung's mindset, which is he's a bit more defensive at the moment. And I think he was fine even if Apotheosis were to come down there because he had the double devolving missiles. And against this spot where Alan is not choosing to commit any buffs, he just plays Jandis.
And all of a sudden, if a blitzchung, I was going to say, oh, brilliant, that's a nice, easy illusioned Nightblade, and you just have a big Gurubashi Berserker to keep hitting them in the face. But in one of the most ancient interactions, the old magic in Hearthstone, coin into Cabal Shadow Priest to steal the Gurubashi Berserker. We're going 2014 in this game, and blitzchung realized that perfectly, thus making the correct decision here in this particular instance to make the Gurubashi the illusioned version. Very, very nice
I love
play.
this. It's such a cute throwback. But of course, blitzchung knows that that one dies to a single proc from Raz, so I wouldn't be surprised to see this Nightblade trade onto the Vile Fiend and just play Raz and Freeze on the wall. There could be a different line here.
You fight me, you get burned.
Okay. I guess if you're going for devolving missiles as the first spell, then like the fact that it's an illusion version doesn't really matter, because it would be reduced anyway. But I still have questions. He could have started with like Ray of Frost, right, on that turn instead.
Yes, something felt fishy about this for me. Also because I don't know what the average outcome of 3 missiles there is, but it feels like it was optimistic to hope that 4 health or less would be left on the board after Alan gets left with what, like a 4-drop and a 1-drop.
Yeah, like he could have traded. Oh yeah, because I mean he would have had to sacrifice the Nightblade by trading it into the Cabal Shadow Priest, but he could have got an easier clear on that turn using less resources, I think. But it wasn't necessarily wrong, I think. There was the fact that he gets to keep the Nightblade alive with that line is pretty useful.
Yeah, it's definitely worth looking back on, but gotta move on now because blitzchung has drawn Shinvala with Apprentice and Magic Trick Evolving Missiles. It's very likely that he can let this go off, or even guaranteed if he wants to play Arcane Intellect, but I think if he picks up something good from Magic Trick, that'll be the priority.
It's
just
tough,
finding a way
isn't
to deal with a 4/4.
Right, because he does have the ability to pop off on this turn with getting the Arcane Intellect down, as well as the Shenvala, the Apprentice, all of this nonsense. But he could wait a turn. It could just be Raz on this turn, which isn't terrible to clear off the board again. It was a very close call, I think.
Benefits for waiting. I'm not quite sure with Priest. It's always like, yeah, by the time Soul Mirror is active, it's always going to be a possibility. So I tend to prefer going in just before Plague of Death is also a possibility.
That's true. That's true. But then again, this is going into turn 7, so all of a sudden Soul Mirror becomes a real possibility. But it's it's a one-off card. You can't be playing around everything so incredibly avariciously at all points.
I think blitzchung at some point just has to bite the bullet and say, if you have it, you have it. And even so, if it's just Soul Mirror this turn, the Shenvala actually survives at least.
That is true. You can keep going then, especially with the Wand Thief being found.
But Alan's other options are Time Rip, Shenvala, trade-off Apprentice, and then save Soul Mirror for what will most likely be a symmetrical clear on the next turn, at least on these 2 minions that live past this turn.
Ooh. Nice way to fill out the mana as well with the second generated evil conscriptor of the series.
What are the odds?
True mastery takes
You're again on it.
These are all reactive cards when blitzchung is clearly trying to be the aggressor here.
Yeah.
Ends up just taking the weakest one in preparation for a Cyclone being picked up, hopefully off the top for him.
Agreed. Ooh, that's an interesting Siamat there, because all of a sudden Soul Mirror is like... It's good, isn't it? But it's the problem with Raz, again, of how it gets to stick and can clear off his own Raz on the following turn. It's not super clean.
I think it's fine, though. He still ends up with a Solarian Prime in his deck, and the Alan's Raz will be the first to go off on a board. So the one thief that blitzchung keeps at 1 HP also dies.
Another
All things
mirror's on.
considered.
So,
Oh
sorry,
my
go ahead.
gosh. All things considered, I think Alan ends up ahead on board with this soul mirror, so it's totally worth it. But you're absolutely right. The big deal here is that Alan's hand is now just all heavy hitters.
Yeah. Which is good and bad. You know, this is a hand that is powerful, but maybe clunky. And in the face of Solarian Prime, if that can get a lot of pressure onto the board, a lot of damage through to the face, Alan's hand may be too slow in order to fight back in the right way.
Maybe. If this Prime hits card draw, it's absolutely huge. Blitzchung needs value generation.
That's not it. That's not it either.
Not great.
Board clear is there. It's a big deal to get that in its own right, and a little bit of extra damage with Raz, of course. But this is not game winning quite yet. There are powerful lines for Alan to fight back.
Are there? Murazon just summons a 7/7 here. It's getting super scary, so it's just looking like, yeah, Galakron flip a coin.
Beyond imagination, succumb to madness.
Ooh. Okay. Malagos?
Whoa.
I mean, just because nothing else in Blitzchung's hand can be played for value this turn, I think it's just rip the Malagos.
You need to spend your mana. Next turn, if it sticks, Icicle can be used to draw a card, obviously with the Ray of Frost, and deal a huge amount of damage.
Oh my goodness. What's the ideal way to go about this?
So he has tested for Counterspell because he played the Radiance on the previous turn, so he knows that if he plays Twisting Nether, it will clear the board.
Right. I was just racking my brain for something more efficient than Twisting Nether, but I don't think he can afford to take the risk of leaving either of these up.
Yeah. Do what you got to do. Pray that there is no card draw left for Blitzchung. And while Icicle is in hand, unless he wants to go Ray of Frost Icicle on his own Neophyte, which I don't imagine happening, it's starting to turn around for Alan.
Yeah, this is really icky for Blitzchung. Playing down an Apprentice just for the 3 damage. I think that's reasonable because outside of Evocation, he can still just play all his spells and Mana Cyclone if that's the draw off the top.
What to do? What to do?
And this is really the heart of the matchup, isn't it? It's the fact that Mage almost always runs into this instance where they've run out of stuff, they've run out of card draw, they've run out of threats, and it's basically just does that come before or after they've managed to kill the priest that decides the matchup. And in this instance, it looks like that's happened before they were able to kill the priest.
Blitzchung majorly stressed out, but he still has top decks to get him out of this. Evocation, Mana Cyclone to some extent. Also, it's a big deal that this Cult Neophyte came down 1 turn later because it could have shut off the Zephyr's Twisting Nether turn because Zephyr's does not realize when Cult Neophyte's Battlecry has been activated. Well, he can start with the card draw. So Ray of Frost, Icicle.
So does that mean you
Probably
start with Apprentice?
Yeah, the Apprentice. I think you probably just commit it because you're going to play the Studies as well.
Whoa, that's 2 good minions here. It's probably got to be Astromancer, I'd guess, because you need to dig yourself out of a increasingly terrible situation, and a random dragon isn't going to do that.
Yeah, that's fair to assume.
I think the really big thing now for Blitzchung, though, is holding onto this Apprentice is a pretty big deal because he still has Evocation in the deck, right? And that is 1 turn that can absolutely swing things back in your favor. So even though there was some thinking to just throw down the Apprentice to get it on board, I like holding it back here and just trying to go for that 1 blowout turn, survive until Evocation comes down, and then burst your opponent out the game.
It's true, but he did not have the other half of Ray of Frost to freeze this Crimson Hothead, so Alan can stick Apotheosis on this. However, I don't think Alan has tested for Spellbender, so that'll be on his mind as well.
Right. Yeah, I believe you're correct.
What about?
At 12, I think it's reasonable to assume that you can survive another turn, so we could just see him go for a Tiamat board clear type play.
Mm-hmm. I mean, he knows that's safe, if nothing else, right? He's tested for the mirror entity, everything else like that.
Okay, but by going face, he realizes that it's not Spellbender, so now he can go Tiamat Apotheosis and undo all of Blitzchung's hard work.
That's the big one. He's going to be healing for, what is this, 16 health on this turn alone, and very possibly more thereafter. It's looking like lights out for blitzchung, unless either the Evocation can work its magic, or Solarian Prime, drawn from his deck, can get there.
Not it, though. So I think it's that time of day where we've arrived in somehow generate box territory to try and win.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I still think that the best route is Solarian Prime, or again, you know, if he gets Evocation, we're looking at Apprentice, Evocation into Power of Creation, or into Deep Freeze, or into I don't know, maybe chaining some combination of Tome of Intellect plus into Magic Trick, or some kind of nonsense like that, where you just go back and forth and generate crazy amounts of value.
Yep. What you just said, all of it can be achieved by one box. So that's why
sure.
I say box. But in short, it is looking very close to hopeless for blitzchung from this point, because Alan is so far ahead on value and is nowhere near close to dying anymore. When Murazond will rebuild a decent-sized board for Alan.
Yeah, I like that he's using up his spells here in order to just try and clear the board. It's that point that he's reached where you have to go in on the board. The Apprentice is the part that I don't necessarily agree with in this instance, I've got to say. Because again, like I said, you need something very impressive to happen. And the Apprentice on its own here is just not going to get there.
I mean, I kind of like the Apprentice because it means Evocation off the top, you can play box that same turn. If the Apprentice is already on board.
Okay, fair enough.
What can I say, Derek? I think this is a box-only type of game plan now.
Is that so?
Or it has to be the most impressive prime ever.
Well, why don't we do a little fusion and go prime into box?
Alright, okay. With our peanut brains combined, Chung can have a win condition.
Not much of one though, because this is a very, very impressive push onto the board right now. Clearing up obviously the Apprentice as well.
Right. So now that Evocation into box is off the table, it has to be the prime. Oh, pain. And I was holding out for Devolve the Lazul into Doomsayer.
That's huge! Getting Arcane Intellect there is legit one of the best spells that Blitzchung could possibly generate. That's another Cyclone!
Okay,
That's three more spells!
Okay.
Woo! Deep Freeze double mirror image, that's a turn. That's a board right there, ready to go.
I mean, it's a turn, but it's not a winning play?
It buys him the time, Gia. That's all he needs.
To get Evocation. Okay. Find the prime.
Blitzchung right now is the Dutch Vandal in the past zone. He just needs a little trust, a little time, a little hope, and probably a little money actually to get this one done as well.
Money? Alan just taking some nice free card draw and a little bit of board presence. I mean, I would just rip this Breath to get the buff on the Ghidra. Oh wait, he's already played a spell.
No, I don't think so. I think it's just the weird effect where the spell burst sometimes just disappears.
Oh, okay. I get tripped up by this bug so much.
Yeah, me too. All right, this is the turn. One last chance.
He can conjure the Cyclone, look for Doomsayer, the classic Cyclone Mage desperation play in the mirror.
That's true. Okay, well that's actually worth considering here. It's either that or Deep Freeze double mirror image, which you can Deep Freeze the Ghidra, I suppose, and then hope that because he played the Breath of the Infinite that you have enough stuff in play to survive the turn.
Okay. But then you run into the same problem next turn. But okay, all we've been doing, right, from blitzchung's perspective, is stalling until Prime. So I do think your play has better odds than trying to look for Doomsayer of surviving to the next turn.
I think so too.
Time runs out on me.
It's pretty miserable, but he has to do it. Stay alive and give himself the 0.001% or something chance.
Yeah. You take what you can get. Okay, that is not lethal quite yet. Obviously, Renew could just instantly give him what he needs.
Yeah, start with that. Seems like a good idea. Any argument of starting with the Spellkin? It feels iffy to me because of board space.
That's not it quite yet. It's, you know, it's fine though. He's not dying. It's just about trying to get the lethal right now to stop any nonsense, because he knows better than anyone that there is that Solarian Prime in the deck ready to steal the game from him.
That's right. But if you're not able to get the lethal this turn, then Alan just is supposed to prepare his best for Solarian off the top. And I'm not quite sure the way you do that, but having a Shadow Word Death to instantly answer the Prime is probably a good place to start.
That's another chance. Wave of Apathy almost actively bad on this board, bluffing the attack of all the mirror images.
True.
I like getting a bit of extra pressure, I guess, with Mass Resurrection, just in case, again, there is some kind of a board flip.
Okay. One more draw for Blitzchung. That is
That's
not
not
money, but he can conjure and look for Walking Fountains.
Slash Grom, which he wouldn't be able to activate more than one of with his ping.
Big warrior guy is not helping out enough here.
The bully not going to be able to get the job done. Let's try again. Okay, ping your Celine because it's funny, and then we go to game 3 here
Yes.
for Alan versus Blitzchung to try and wrestle this one back. I have to imagine, again, that it's going to be for both players sticking with their primary at the end of the day, because I don't really see, again, any advantage to switching now. It's really just a case of whether or not Blitzchung can find the meat in his deck to actually get over the finish line and close out for the win.
Yep, with Specialist. Hold on.
Oh, does he not actually have lethal on board? I mean,
not on board.
Sure. I take back my next game analysis.
Surely the Raise Dead, the Hero Power, the Cobalt, even Murazan. Okay, Murazan won't give him lethal. He'll get Mana Giants and Conj. This is agonizing for
Holy
Blitzchung.
Smite, Holy Smite. Let's end this.
Renew into Holy Smite or something. Please. Blitzchung looks like he's in pain. Okay, Master Spell. GG.
That's the one. Alright, there we have it. Alan managing to take the win. Well, I was going to say against all the odds. Actually, with all the odds there in that second game of the series. It's kind of funny already how we have one priest in our first game of the day, and it's already almost been longer than the entire broadcast was. for APAC yesterday, and we're not even done with the series quite yet. I will say, though, I think for the most part there, Alan had a really good idea of everything he should be afraid of in that series and just shut things down one after the other, paying attention to like anything that could possibly go wrong from his opponent, and just took a well-deserved win.
I think the hardest decision point for Alan was when he did have that turn of the Tiamat Apotheosis, just the ordering on it if he was testing for Spellbender, because in the end, Alan went face to test or by elimination instead of confirmation of Spellbender.
Right.
So he eliminated Ice Barrier and Vaporize from the pool. And even if those were not the secrets left up, he still had the possibility of playing Tiamat and the Spellbender on that. And the Apotheosis on that, which you still end up getting wrecked by Spellbender either way, but you optimize it if it's not Spellbender. So that's the type of play that I feel really, really stood out. For blitzchung, I definitely have to praise his mental fortitude for hanging on there for whatever tiny percentage he had to try and win the game.
Yeah, there were a couple of draws, it's got to be said. I think one thing, interestingly enough for me, there is part of the reasoning why we see players being hesitant to call Shenvala and auto-include in the deck, because we've all seen the screenshots where, you know, there have been 4/5/5 summoned on turn 5 and everyone calls Crane a flat earther for not wanting to include it in his deck in the first place. But then you see games like that where it sits around a lot of the time, and kind of even worse than that, you could make the argument that it sucked a lot of the spells out of the hand, and all it did was generate a 5/5, which is not good enough to win the matchup. What you really need to do against Priest, I find, is either go super all-in with Shenvala. You know, if you hit the super nutty starting hand and you get 3 or 4 5/5s at the start of the game, go with that. Or more commonly, you want to save your spells for Mana Cyclone, I find, so that you can actually keep going and going and going. Because every single spell you generate is just more ways to spend your mana. And that, for me, is what you want to be doing as Mage. Doesn't matter what you're spending your mana on, but you've got to be spending all your mana every turn, and then eventually you should be able to cross the finish line against them.
Very good points across the board, Derek, but I am not going to enter this conversation because I do not want to be misconstrued as supporting flat earthers in any way, shape, or form. Copernicus did not deserve this. Okay, we're on to game 3 now, and of course both players on the primary, as is the nature specialist. Usually after game 1, the players will have just arrived at their final deck list for the matchup, unless they're flip-flopping on what they believe is the principle of the secondary and tertiary decks, because even if you lose with a deck that you feel favored with, it doesn't mean that you picked the wrong deck.
I really like as well blitzchung holding back on the primordial studies here, even though you could like technically get a free mana there just by doing it in combination with the Solarian on this turn. I think as many spells as you can have in hand, again, to juice up that Cyclone is undeniably the way to go. Oh.
Ooh, Intellect makes this very smooth for blitzchung. He picks up a cram session anytime soon. That is huge for his value generation, which he was so sorely lacking last game.
Oh! Oh!
You start with the studies now, and can even
so.
Get... Oh, another prime!
God. Too many cards. Too many.
Can never have too many.
Oh, Apprentice, Cyclone, Ray of Frost! This is the hand. This is it.
Okay. Okay, we kind of highlighted different parts of the combo, right? You either go for Apprentice Shenvala, or you go for Apprentice Cyclone, or you go Jandis even, if you want to put the Shenvala Apprentice Cyclone turn all together, which is possibly ideal.
Oh, so I think Alan, despite having a couple of ways to completely clear the board here, has got his sights set on something a little bit greater here, with trading into the lab partner and stealing another one of these primes, which means in combination with the Solarian already inside his copy of Karj, he's going to be getting 2 primes over the course of this game, unless the devolving missiles can come down.
Yeah, potentially very huge here. blitzchung has the chance to pick one up with a magic trick, or he can just stall it with the Rays of Frost.
Oh my god. Too many spells, Gia. Too many. This finally is actually too many. He's going to run out of hand space.
That's right. So what I would like to see here from blitzchung is save either the lab partner or one Ray of Frost for the post-cyclone activation.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
So that you don't overdraw the spell from your deck. Also reasonable to not kill off the Prime immediately because he can still generate Devolving Missiles from this mana cycle, which you would much rather get here.
So this was 6 spells generated, but only room for 5 in hand. And those 5 spells he generated are low-key absolutely insane.
Okay, what
One
have you done
does.
here? Because you don't actually want to kill off the Prime immediately, nor the Karj. Okay, trick. But that was a box passed up. Let it be known.
He's just playing all the spells he possibly can at this point. Oh my goodness. Okay, there we go.
Yeah. At this point, you do just play a spell because he would have overdrawn if not.
Yeah, I mean, I think if he'd had a few more seconds to think about it, that probably would have ended up being Ray of Frost being played, obviously, as it is kind of just a worse card than the Brain Freeze.
Yeah.
But the important thing is, he played all his cards. Mana Giant is going to be giga cheap super soon, and he can find those Mana Giants, more importantly, with the Arcane Int.
Alan is just staring at this hand full of generated cards. It's difficult to play around things, but he can at least clear the board that he sees with this Breath of the Infinite and finish off with the Disciple of Galakron. Getting to the point now, though, where the Priest player has to get crafty in trying to deal with a lot of unpredictable variables from the Mage's side.
Yeah, it was kind of an interesting way for Alan to play that out there as well. I was definitely looking at heal the Kaj and then go for the Breath of the Infinite thereafter to keep your 3-1 with a 3-2 inside on board. He's prioritizing just getting the minions down in play from his hand, which I can understand. You know, you want to be playing out your minions proactively and actually spending your mana in this matchup.
Yeah, maybe also because he has the Elucia in hand now that he wants to actively empty the hand a bit more, but that would be the least of his problems because there's just this Raz staring him down. He does not have any removal. Kronks is a decent play onto the board, but it is not defensive for Alan whatsoever. Kind of still think it's just Kronks. Oh, but then Alan knows that there's a Ray of Frost in Blitzchung's hand.
He's just going with the Elucia. I wonder what he was counting up there, because obviously he knows his generated spells, and he's hoping to, what, dump a lot of the cheap spells in hand? Gotta be said, though, this is fairly disastrous.
Yeah, the best thing he can do is dump the Shinvala. Obviously, the Arcane Intellect would end up being good for Blitzchung. I think that was Alan just hoping for any answer to the Raz, because he did not believe Kronks was good enough there. You can look at it as a last resort play.
Wait, what's Blitzchung doing? He can go Cabal Acolyte Wandmaker plus 1 mana spell and steal the Shenvala right back. That's way better.
Yep, that seems a lot better than the other alternatives.
Okay. Brain Freeze, literally perfect as well.
Yeah, and Alan's like, seriously, you top decked that and you got an incredible 1-cost spell.
I mean, it's got to be said, no matter what Alan was anticipating would happen on this turn, it did not happen. This was an unmitigated disaster.
Top deck potential for Zephrys or Prime! Well, that's the only play.
Greetings.
It's prime time, Alan. Let's go. Okay.
Bear in mind, you can see some salty reactions from the players, but for these two in particular, the results this week matter so much. They're both in danger of Division B if they don't do well. Oh, Nova's huge!
Decent. You're alive. That's the important thing here.
What do you mean decent? That's insane!
I mean, it didn't clear the board. That's what he was looking at ideally, because this Shenvala can now start to pop off and stuff. But good enough, you know, good enough.
Alright, starting with draw for Blitzchung, the board space is a real issue.
Yeah, it really is.
Freezing Prime looks reasonable to me, and you can just play the Ancient Mysteries to proc the Shenvala.
Yeah, freeze Ancient Mysteries and then Cyclone for 3 cards. He wouldn't
think it's
overdraw, I
fine.
believe. Yeah, it seems alright.
His hand is double power creation evocation. I think he's got no lack of value. Okay, drawing towards Mana Giant, also very reasonable.
Yeah, that'll do.
Oh, yikes. So Siamat, Rush, Wind Fury can deal with the 5/5 and then part of the Giant, and then you trade into the Giant and the Ras. You leave Shenvala up. Nothing. Nice.
I mean, leaving Shenvala up is fine because you have Plague of Death for the next turn. You just want to stop damage to the face. That's
true.
That's the priority this turn.
So with the trades I was talking about, he'll end up with 6 damage presented on board.
Which means, you know, you're not dead to Frostbolt quite yet because it was only do 4. Oh no, wait, you would be dead to Frostbolt at that point. Okay, so you're dead to quite a lot of stuff, including the random generation that can occur. But it's the best he's got.
Oh wait, sorry, he can deal with Shenvala. Or wait, never mind.
No.
Yeah. The option was between Shenvala and Raz, and as you mentioned, of course, it's much better to deal with the immediate damage.
Many ways to find lethal. We're looking at Frostbolt only being needed as long as there's mana for a ping to go along with it.
Now that you don't find it, probably just take evocation, go for a 1 thief reroll. Okay,
that's it. With the 1 thief finding the fireball at the end after a weird old game to close things out. I'm sure Alan will be kicking himself for that one, by which I do not mean to say that it was necessarily an incorrect play, because Mind Render Alusha seems to rend the minds of all who gaze upon her, casters and players alike. Very, very complicated turn there, and I would be so curious to hear what Alan thought he was going to be hitting there. What reads did he have from blitzchung's hand that didn't work out in the end?
That's right. For you and I as casters, it's so easy to sit on our high horses and say, of course, you don't Elucia here. You only have 3 mana left. But my best guess is that Alan genuinely thought that just Kronks that turn was a losing play. It was his best non-Elucia play there. And the Elucia gave him chances, I suppose, of hitting freeze, of hitting a single Ray of Frost could have changed the landscape of that quite a bit. But nothing too impactful there in the end. And that, I think, was very clean from blitzchung to arrive at the point where he could just pressure Alan turn after turn.
Very nicely done indeed. We're possibly looking at our first tempo mage going through to the semi-finals to join a rogue and a druid that we currently have sitting there. Very diverse group of decks and classes that we have represented here in the top 8 overall. blitzchung is, of course, going to be waiting in the winner's bracket match for the winner of our second match of the day, which is coming up right now, in Bank Yugi versus Dawn. And while, again, we're talking about potential mages coming through to the semi-finals, while Bank Yugi does have the mage here, it's an entirely different story, and a very Bank Yugi story, as we've been talking about over his short Grandmasters career.
Yes, Bank Yugi with a Highlander mage.